Umthethosisekelo wakuleli uhlinzekela inkululeko yenkolo nezinkolelo okuhlanganisa nelungelo lokusungula, ukujoyina, nokugcina izinhlangano zenkolo. Iyakwenqabela ukucwasa ngokwenkolo futhi icacisa inkululeko yokukhuluma, ayidluliseli ekukhuthazeni inzondo esekelwe enkolweni. Although South Africa has never had an official state religion, the country's constitution explicitly states everyone has a right to freedom of conscience, religion, thought, belief, as well as opinion. However, the government actively promoted Christianity throughout much of the 20th century, and it remains the most widely followed faith today. Ohlelweni namuhla sibuza ukuthi inaliphi'qhaza inkolo yesintu kanti futhi liyini isiko kanti futhi yini inkolo. Sikhumbuze ke mbukela ukuthi ungaba ingxenye lolu hlelo ngokushayela ucingo sizo umbono noma umbuzo wakho. Inombolo zethu zocingo 011-714-0677 noma 011-714-0678. Kanti mbukela ungabuye futhi usithole emakhasini okuxhumana ku X @SABC Izindaba kanye na ku Facebook ikhasi lethu SABC Izindaba. Ukuze kubelula ke mbukeli sicela uqale #Asikhulume #SABC News bese ke ubhala umbuzo noma umbono wakho. Asikhulume. Mbukeli, spiritual leader Dr. Samuel Khadebe, regarded as a high-level spiritual guide or imboni by his followers, has put together a book that introduces, in fact, it's an introduction to African indigenous spirituality. It also seeks to differentiate between religion, universal spirituality, and African indigenous spirituality. Now, the book has been officially launched at the V&A Waterfront in Cape Town. Also recently, the Icacisa Heritage Institute, in partnership with the CRL Rights Commission, recently held a seminar, which, among other things, sought to look at challenges, in fact, related to the failure to document African traditional religions, which to some extent has contributed to its marginalization, and SABC News filed this report.
Dr. Samuel Khadebe is the charismatic leader of Revelation Church, a spiritual home to an estimated 10 million worshippers in southern African countries, including Malawi and Mozambique. He founded the indigenous spiritual movement in 2009, and his support base quickly spread. His latest book makes a clear distinction between religion and spirituality according to the societies in which they are practiced.
It's about the confusion of spiritual matters. You would know that time to time, especially here in South Africa, there will be issues in churches, there will be issues. Now we were facing the river matter. There was a matter at the river, people drowned in the river. And whenever these things arise, you'd see a lot of confusion. People painting everybody with the same brush. And people speaking all conflicting issues pertaining spirituality. So the book was inspired so that we can bring clarity on spiritual matters. And also we were invited in some conference in Europe, although it was a religious conference. And you know how they termed African indigenous spirituality, it seemed as if it's something that does not exist. It's a myth.
African indigenous spirituality acknowledges that the Creator does not communicate with humans, but with spirit guides, also known as Izithunywa. Regarded as a repository of all cultures and traditions, African indigenous spirituality claims that the spiritual realm is involved in the physical realm.
What makes it even important for someone like me is that Africa was destroyed through the destruction of her spirituality. Spirituality is very special. When you talk about the past, the present, and future, it is for convenience of minds which are micro minds. They can't comprehend issues very complex with long cycles. So, but in reality, this is why you find spiritual people understand our past, our history, and guide us.
It further acknowledges that through constant practice of art, culture, and meditation, it's possible to grow spiritually. Other activities accompanying the book launch include an annual memorial lecture of Uzilezwe's father, Dr. Steve Mzuvukile Slabet Khadebe, a former lecturer of indigenous languages at UCT. Mlamli Maneli, SABC News, Cape Town.
Mbogeli, we have limited time, but let's try to really discuss and see ukuthi kahle kahle yini African indigenous spirituality ihambile zethu Dr. Ezenkolo, a spiritual leader, kanye no Pastor Iyakwenqabela, Secretary General of the International Federation of Christian Churches. Let me thank you both for your time. I'll start with you, Dr. Ezenkolo. What is African indigenous spirituality? Masingachazela ababukeli nje.
Siyabonga, sibingelele bonke abantu abasibukela. It's a tricky question. Mangi simplify. Mangizama ukuyisimplify African indigenous spirituality. Indlela African people babexhumana ngayo nomdali nezidalwa. So in other words, African spirituality practice of connecting with its spiritual entities, because mandulo sasinganayo thina religion. Sasine spirituality, sasi practice is spirituality. So multi African indigenous spirituality, it means that u practice African or normal is spirituality in the African context. Goba is spirituality as well, siyama ngama context. So African meaning u practice is spirituality in the African context.
Does that include mhlambe umuntu obukele uyabuza ukuthi inkolo, izangoma, prophet, what does it include?
I think linguistics neka bakhe basilekelele ngelanguage, you see, because igama elithi inkolo meaning that I believe.
Yeah.
In spirituality actually asinankolo, sinalento sithi ukwazi. Umoya awuconvincwa. Umoya uyazi. So spirituality akusinto esayifundiswa mandulo, into esisiphila. We just had guidance. So kahle kahle sivamisa ukuthi inkolo just for abantu, the lay people by understand. So singasho ke sithi inkolo yakwantu.
Pastor Iyakwenqabela, one then asks the question because you know, when we look at African indigenous spirituality, and I wonder, firstly, what is the position of the church on this?
On the African spirituality?
Yes.
Is that the question?
Yes.
I think that, you know, as your introduction said, that, you know, our constitution allow us to, you know, to believe or to practice a different religion, whether spirituality, whether it's a church. And also what from the IFCC point of view, we won't try to define other people's belief or other religion or other spirituality. We want to concentrate on what we believe. As a matter of fact, as IFCC, back a long time ago, we have worked with different leaders, religious leaders, on different issues, that particularly on the social issues that confront communities and all of that. But as a church, we believe in God, you know, we believe in Jesus, we believe in the Holy Spirit, and that's what we practice, that's what we preach, that's what we do. And so, but IFCC, we're not into saying that religion, that you know, so we really try and practice and preach what we believe. And we, like I said, we have worked with different religious leaders. We've worked together on different things in the country.
Okay, so listening to that, then before I come back to you, Pastor Iyakwenqabela, Dr. Ezenkolo, it sounds like there is a working together that happens, but is this working together even in when you are practicing what you are believing? Noma zonke lezi zinto, they're separate.
Zehlukile. It's another question if kunabantu abazihlanganisayo, but now zehlukile. And I think if we are matured, as Pastor Gift said, we have worked together. At the end of the day, we must achieve peace and unity. But working together will be on matters of social issues and the country.
Yeah.
But when you come to, again, let's use the word inkolo, of course we differ. Because African indigenous spirituality, it differs from Eurocentric religions. It differs from religions. It's the indigenous belief system, if I should put it for umlaleli I understand. So you're working together, it's only on other matters, but not on the belief system.
Pastor Kiet, there are people who say that Christianity seeks to sometimes move people from their Africanness, if I can even use that word, where people are saying, Guti, people are not allowed to connect with who they are on an African level, but they must take a much more Eurocentric approach towards their lives and not connect with anything that has to do with their indigenous background. How then does the church, respond to that, and is it true to begin with?
Okay, so I wouldn't use the word allowed because, no one must be forced to do anything. I think it's not a question of being allowed. It's a question of what we believe, but also let's dig a little bit on the culture.
Yeah.
I'll give an example. I'm from the Xhosa clan, the family. There are practices that the Xhosa family do, gathering together, knowing, each other, introducing each other in the family. And so the Christian and also the cultural heritage. For example, I'll give an example. In September, different churches encourage people to dress in their own cultural attire to come and celebrate culture and our differences, our uniqueness. Particularly South Africa is quite an interesting country. But when it comes to then the belief system, we believe then in God. So that's the difference that we, even in our preaching, we encourage people, we believe in God, give your life to Jesus as Lord and Savior.
Yeah.
And that's all we believe, that's all we're saying. And whoever then accept that message, they receive it willingly. We can't force anyone to it's a willing, you must be willing, and then once you agree, then we take you through the process of Christianity. Okay. So in terms of the culture issues, we are very clear that in terms of culture, we acknowledge our heritage, we acknowledge different cultures, attires, and so it's only on the belief, that's where we are. And that's why we could, in fact, Babakade, we work for a long time together. While I'm practicing my own faith, he's practicing his own faith without any clashes at all.
All right.
So I think that's where we come. But it's never say you are not allowed. It's never saying you don't want. It's people must be willing to receive the message that we preached.
Okay. When we come back from the break, I want us to talk about, firstly, Ncwadi Loiphethe Baba, and also the council that Dr. Khatebe, you've also, started, and what are we seeing there, and whether or not all of this, as we are talking tonight, can work together, and what causes intolerance, even in some of the instances that we are seeing. Bugel, agasithi shelele edo. Siyabuya. Mbogeli siphinde sikwamukele Ohlelweni Asikhulume. Let's talk uma ngabe usaqeda ukuhlanganyela kanye nathi sikhuluma ngeAfrican indigenous spirituality. Kuyini? Kanti abanye bethu futhi bake babe confused uma bebona ama issues of spirituality. Mhlawumbe umuntu ecabanga ukuthi sikhuluma ngezangoma, sikhuluma ngabaprofeti, sikhuluma ngabefundisi, sikhuluma ngani. We're trying to unpack all of that for you so that you understand what are we talking about. Uma sikhuluma ngalokho sahlele hambile zethu Dr. Khatebe sibona la kunencwadi ethi an introduction into African indigenous spirituality, and I understand ukuthi there's also a council that's being formed. Let's talk about that briefly.
Yeah, incwadi seeks to do that, to clarify, because as Bishop eshilo lapho ukuthi umuntu yazikhethela. But now a problem, remember, we were colonized. Salethelwa ne systems abanye abantu. It is important ukuthi umuntu omnyama today azi ukuthi before konke lokho kwenzeke besiyini thina. So incwadi does not seek ukuconvert nobody, but iyasichazela ukuthi thina sabantu abamnyama sasipractice ini before kufike konke lokho. So that's what the book seeks to do, and then it differentiate ke ihlukanise ke zonke lezi zinto ukuthi umuntu akwazi ukuchazeleka kahle. I council kunama council of religions. Kune Council of Christianity, kune councils of the Islam religions, I think Judaism as well. Ayikho council ye African indigenous spirituality. Intesinayo sinama association, not African indigenous spirituality, ama association ezangoma. Ubungoma is part of African indigenous spirituality. But the African indigenous spirituality ayikho limited with practice yobungoma. So the council is there ukuthi nathi ke practice lento sikhona ukuba nayo le umbrella body ezokwazi ukusibheka sixoxe into zethu sipreserve inkolelo zokhokho bethu.
So who's part of the council?
Imini founder and the chair. Kube khona ke uGog Julia. Uyena koyisangoma kube khona ine sectors ezahlukile. Kube khona uGogo Umuthwa, Isis Muthwa. Kukhona amakhosi. Amakhosi of course are traditional leaders, but babe leader alongside the spiritual guiders.
So there's in this council, if I understand you correctly, kunezangoma and there's
kunabathandazi, kunamakhosi, kunama academias azokwenza i-research, kunama community builders.
And before mhlambe we go back to Pastor, let's try then mhlambe somebody says to you tonight, kodwa if uzothatha umuntu othandazayo isangoma and you put all of these people together under one umbrella, are you not confusing issues?
Bonke abantu abalapha ba practice umthandazi under African indigenous spirituality kuyehluka. Akase umthandazi in religion. Umthandazi kwinkolo yakwantu. Siyakhuleka nathi khuleka umdala.
And Pastor Kiet, one of the things that, we often sometimes see, particularly when you speak to someone who practices Christianity, is that they would say, for example, don't mix issues of religion and African spirituality. Don't mix as a Christian, ukuba isangoma, it's not a good thing. And I wonder, why would that be, particularly for someone who's watching tonight who says, but can't I be a Christian and also be sangoma?
Before I answer that, thank you, Bongo. Before I answer that, one of the things I wanted to mention is that when the issue of Christianity, maybe where people seem to think that it's focused more on, Western teachings and whatever, it's that it's maybe the values that maybe we've adopted. I'll give an example. It's not a value, but I'll give an example. Mao shumela ngesiZulu, Mao shumela ngesingisi, those differences. And so there is in the preaching of the gospel that certain values that are Western, European, whatever, get adopted, but that not necessarily mean it's the gospel. There are African values that are very great. Take, for instance, Ubuntu value, umuntu ngabantu. All of those things that are very important, which I think the Christian faith is starting to recognize and realize. And so there's a difference between values that are good, that can be practiced universally by any religion, respect umunye umuntu, respect and just values ubuntu, which maybe in the preaching of the gospel might have been taken out because of different cultures, but the preaching of the gospel, that's what it is. We're preaching Jesus, that's it. And those who are willing then come on their own, So in terms of your question, answering your question, you can't serve two masters. So if you're gonna come to Christ, you come to Christ and believe. How will then Christ work? How are you gonna differentiate to see what I believe in? It's actually working, what's not working. If you are having 3 or 4 belief or different system that you are practicing. So we believe that, when you come to Christ, you give yourself, to Christ. I'll give example with myself. I gave my life, I was 17 years old. I was a frustrated young man, no father, and somebody was preaching the gospel, I gave my life. And since then, I've never looked back. And I can say without fear of contradiction, it has worked for me.
Yeah.
Jesus has worked for me. And so I wouldn't want to practice any other religion other than that. And that's what I would tell someone.
All right.
But can I work with Uba Mukhadebe? Absolutely. We have worked together with respect. You know me, I mean, we respect, we phone each other, we talk, but this is what I believe. That's what I'm going to practice.
All
and
right.
from his, I don't think there's a problem me telling some, but people must be willing. And I put myself as an example of this is what it worked for me. I can't go anywhere. That's the reason. Thank you so much.
All right. And when we come back from the break, Babkhadeb, ngizothanda ukuthi mhlambe if ufuna ukuphawula kulokho, it's okay, you can. But there's something else I want us to, before we go, speak to the viewers about. And this is the issue of, sometimes we see inkolo yabantu being abused. And I say this by, sometimes we see it as people who are posing to be Christian leaders, people who are posing to be Zangoma and all of that. So how then do you do the vetting for your council? But also, two, umuntu ubona kanjani if they are in a dubious place where they're not supposed to be? And that goes for you, Mfundisi, as well, to say, how do you spot somebody who is dubious, ozothatha imali yakho, ozokulimaza emoyeni, and all of these things? So before we go, we help the viewers understand the importance of that. Mbukeli will answer all your questions in that regard in just a moment. Mbukeli sesiphetha ake sizwe kuyihambeli zethu ngokubaluleka kokuthuthukisa ukubekezelelana ngokwamasiko nokuvuselela ubuntu phakathi kweinhlangano ezahlukene. Dr. Hadebe, sesivala nje angiqale kuwe. Let's just help the viewers understand. Ukuthi, one, how do you do the vetting for your council? Two, how do they spot somebody who's not genuine?
Yeah, angisheshe nje ngene ngokushesha ngithi Bishop ukhulumile ebalekile. I-value of ubuntu is actually the teachings of ancient African indigenous spirituality. I-vetting lapho esikhumbule is a very complex question, and I believe ngisho naye uBishop uzophendula ngoba usebenza ngomuntu at the end of the day. Umuntu uyohlala good or bad. But in African indigenous spirituality sikubona kuphi lokho. In African indigenous spirituality sikhuluma kakhulu ngedlozi nesithunywa. Sebenza ngesithunywa ke mina. Sithi umoya. Ngapha edluze nidluze. Kumele kube khona i-background yomuntu. Example awukhona ukuthi ngesintu sithi i-calling ngesintu sithi ingulo. Awukhona ukuvuka ekuseni namhlanje uphathwe ingulo. Ayikho lonto le. Ingulo uzalwa nayo. Into isipho esaphiwa kini. Ngikwenzele quick example mina ngaqala ukugula kusho ukuthi uba ne signs ukuthi nginesipho at the age of 4 months. Ungangibuza ukuthi ngazi kanjani ngoba umama wayengelapha ngina 4 months usaphila nanamhlanje wakufakazela lokho ngagula kakhulu ke the age of between 5 and 6 la ngikhumbula khona ke now umuntu ke kumele kube khona lo background yokuthi i signs azikhona ukuthi wawuphethwe yini ezazikhona umuntu ofana nami ke okimboni oyimboni then kumele zibe khona abantu ekuthiwa izimboni mandulo ezakhuluma ngawe uyabona for example before uzalo ugogo Mantsupa wa professor ngami ukuthi ngiyeza ubaba Credo Muthwa by the way wayeyimboni wakhuluma ukuthi uyangazi ngokomoya wangivuma so there has to be track record and there has to be abangasekho noma abaphilile who gives evidence ngawe.
Okay, Mfundisi, very briefly.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the issue of calling and how do we know, I agree. Nati in a Christian faith, you don't just wake up and say, Mfundisi. And then that's why, we have this IFCC, IFCC is there to vet Abefundisi. IFCC is there to make sure people are preaching a sound doctrine, biblical, that it's in the Bible. And so the difference, how do you know if a person just wake up, you must know that this trouble is coming. 2 years, 3 years into trouble. So that's how IFCCs play that role. vetting the pastors, those who are said they were called.
And, you know, I'm hoping, Guti, the next time we speak, we focus specifically on this issue of abuses as well, because that's also partly why abanye abantu would associate a lot of the things with bad behavior, with, you know, they are bad because maybe somebody did something to them. Abafundisi, they are bad because somebody did something to them. So I'm hoping that the part 2 that we have of this conversation, because we've just laid the blanket, it then becomes a deeper look into some of those. Mbugel, September Guti, it has started the conversation for you. Kuqalile ukuthi uxoxe ngayo i-African indigenous spirituality, but also at the same time, some of the religious Christian practices that we're also seeing unfold here. Kodwa ngikubonga kakhulu ukuthi uhlanganyele nathi kanye nezihambeli zethu, imboni udokotela uZulezwe Samuel Khadebe kanye no Pastor Giet Khosa, Secretary General of the International Federation of Christian Churches. Mbugel, ukakhumalo wakwazwane nethimba le Asikhulume sithi ayixabene ayibonana ngokuzayo.